Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We are thrilled to have photographer and filmmaker Gillian Laub as tonight's guest speaker. Originally from Chappaqua, New York, Gillian graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a degree in comparative literature before studying photography at the International Center of Photography. Recent exhibitions include Feast for the Eyes, Nassau County Museum of Art, Southern Rites, Benrubi Gallery, Taylor Wessing Prize 2015, National Portrait Gallery London, Traffic Jaffa Salon Tel Aviv, Perchance to Dream, Andrea Meislin Gallery, and A Moment of Recognition, ICP. Her photographs are in the permanent collections of the High Museum, Atlanta, ICP, the Jewish Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Rose Art Museum, Brandeis University, Harvard University, and the Benton Museum of Art, University of Connecticut. Today, Gillian has published the following monographs: Southern Rites, Damiani, 2015, Testimony, photographs by Gillian Laub, Aperture Press, 2007, and that's how long I've been following your work, unbelievable monograph, and an Italian edition of Testimony, which was published by Contrasto the same year. Gillian produced and directed her first feature film, Southern Rites, which premiered on HBO in 2015. So please help me welcome Gillian Laub to our lecture series.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I organized this lecture because I'm speaking to students, and I wanted to kind of show you where I began as a student. I've been a professional photographer for 18 years now, and I began when I was at the International Center of Photography, and I was really moved by portraiture, by documentary storytelling, and by work that was used for social activism. And I'll begin with this first picture because I began with my family, and all the work that I do is somehow connected to family and community. And in 1998, when I was at ICP, I just remember taking a break, a smoke break. We were in our 4-hour seminar class. And this was the time when everyone was trying to figure out what their thesis project was, and I was trying to figure out my voice and vision as an artist. And I was one of the only Americans in the class. And I remember my friend Christian was making a project about capitalism. And he was a street photographer, and he spotted these women walking down the street towards us, and he was like, "Why are all of those women in fur? Why do they have to wear those fur coats?" And then as the women approached, they come towards me, and I hear, "Gillian, Gillian, what are you doing here?" So it was at that moment, it felt like a very critical moment for me. And I felt embarrassed, ashamed, and somehow outed, but I also felt like this was something I had to kind of address, why I felt this way. So I decided that actually it was time to, I remember my teacher would always say, photograph what you're most afraid of, and also what you know best. So that's when I began photographing my family. And this is Grandpa helping Grandma out of the car. This is Aunt Doris. Tea time. Grandma and Grandpa. Grandma's pills. Jamie practicing for the family. And I also save all of my voicemails. So a lot of these images have this audio component to them now.
Bring in my love. This is Grandpa. I want to wish you a wonderful trip. Stay in good health. I'm going to miss you. When you come back, find my galley.
So I continued to photograph my family as I was photographing many other things, and for me, this work became about kind of. I always felt like an outsider in my family, so it was about kind of being an insider on the outside and an outsider being in the inside, and it was. I was really looking at privilege and aging. And a story about immigrants kind of trying to build the American dream and maintain the American dream. And ultimately it became about aging and fragility. And this is my grandmother and Dorothy, who lived with my grandparents for a few decades. When my grandfather passed away, he stayed with my grandmother. And that's my grandmother on her 90th birthday. I went to pick her up. We all took her out for her an annual birthday lunch. And then as I began to work, I would drop my portfolio off at galleries and magazines, and I was very lucky, and I got gallery representation in my first job. A commission from the New York Times Magazine, and I started to also get these commissions that were fashion commissions. And although I wasn't looking to be a fashion photographer, I used the opportunity to make the kind of pictures I wanted to make with the people, using my family still in the picture. So you would never know that this was a fashion picture. I was given a Versace dress, and I didn't want to dress models. I wanted to make the pictures I wanted to make. So. This is Farah and Myra. And this is, again, another fashion picture in my cousin's house. This was a story about underwear, also in my cousin's house. And I was asked to do a bathing suit story, and I didn't want to do just a typical bathing suit story with models, so I cast plus-size models. And again, for me, the goal was to always make a picture that would transcend the magazine story. And this never made it into the magazine because clearly she's not wearing a bathing suit. She took that off. But for me, this picture stayed with me and transcended the magazine story. And then I started to get different commissions, and I thought it's very important, and I'm just saying as students, I don't know the kind of work that you're doing, but I was very true to what I wanted to say and to photograph, and I was lucky because different editors commissioned me to do stories that I loved and was inspired by. So this was a behind the scenes with Destiny's Child. This was another story for the New Yorker about this wealthy family in Sao Paulo. And then September 11th happened, and everyone has I feel like everyone knows exactly where they were during September 11th and how it affected them. And this was a big turning point for me. I was put on assignment for 2 weeks to photograph families, and this is September 12th, and actually this is a moment where people thought that I was coming in there to photograph them so they could find their loved ones. As the days went on, it was clear that, in fact, they were not going to find them, and that I was photographing them, and it was about who they lost. So there was something about these few weeks going into a stranger's home when they're in deep mourning and feeling as if somehow you're contributing, because it was this weird exchange where they felt like the photograph was actually helping them not be a number and a statistic, but actually feel like they were being acknowledged and seen. And there was something incredibly powerful about every home and family that I met that made me take a moment to kind of figure out what I wanted to do as a photographer and how important images are and the power that they have. So I decided that I really wanted to go to Israel because the second Intifada had begun, and it was a very, very violent time in Israel. And I felt like the coverage that was coming out of Israel was not how I had experienced Israel when I had been there. And I also felt like anyone that talked about Israel had an opinion, and I felt like I didn't have the right to have an opinion unless I did my form of exploration, which was go there with my camera and a journal and kind of explore. And I went to I'd been working a lot with the New York Times, and I went to them and I said, I want to go to Israel so badly. And they were like, great, what do you want to do? You know, they were used to, I did do some serious stories for them, but they were used to, you know, seeing my grandfather in his like Speedo bathing suit. So they had, you know, their photojournalist in Gaza, and they weren't exactly ready to send me there. So I went, and it was really a time that I wanted to figure out, this is kind of how I approach every story and project. It's really my journey of discovery. And the pictures are the product of that. And text has always been incredibly, incredibly important to me. So the images in this project, the book is called Testimony because the testimonies of all the people that contributed to this book are just as important as the pictures. Whenever the pictures are shown in exhibitions, the testimonies have to accompany it. And this was, I just love this journal entry. This is Quintuplet Brothers, and the mother gave me that photograph of them, and I posed them exactly like that as they came home for Shabbat from the army. And in Israel, I was really fascinated by the Arab Israelis who were living in Israel, because there are over 1 million Arab Israelis. So I spent a lot of time in communities that were very mixed, like this. This is a beach in Jaffa. And you see this, I always wanted to publish this as a contact sheet because you see these two families coming together, playing, and then ultimately separating. And that was really, I felt like this was kind of a metaphor for Israel at this time. And I was interested in photographing immigrant families in Israel. So, you know, although this picture looks like 3 happy women, the subtext and the nuance is always in the writing because, you know, they wrote in Arabic, and part of the discovery for me was having somebody translate what everyone had written. So the woman in the middle said, we come to Tel Aviv to have fun. Our husbands can never come with us because it takes them hours to cross the border. So just that, the nuance in that shows kind of the political situation that we were dealing with. And these are 2 girls, and I made an appointment to photograph them with their parents, and they disappeared for 2 hours getting ready, and they come out and they're posing, and I asked them how they learned how to pose like that, and they were like, our Jewish babysitter. But then these are 10-year-old girls, and in the text, in their journal entry, they wrote, you know, very sweet, like, we don't want war anymore, and we miss our babysitter. She can't come here anymore because of the war. So, you know, it was just such innocent words like that were so telling. And I was interested, obviously, it's the military is a huge part of their society. This is Eliza, and she's at a memorial for 3 soldiers in her unit that were kidnapped and apparently in Lebanon, and they were calling out to them to please come home safely. And this was, you know, every project kind of has a turning point where you find your way, and this is a moment, Kinneret, where everything changed, because I was trying to kind of take moments of daily life in Israel without being so political, because everything was so political that was coming out of this region. And then there was a suicide bombing many times that I was there, and I realized that I can't avoid this, and I didn't know exactly how to address this. So I started to go to hospitals. Now, this is just to let you know that portraits, they take, for me, sometimes it can happen, that moment can happen really fast, but sometimes they take a while. I knew Kinneret 2 years before I was able to make this picture of her. So I'll just tell you the story of Kinneret. I met her, and she was burned very, very badly from a suicide bomber. I didn't take this picture of her. This is a photograph that her mother gave me. And I went into her hospital room, and she just had this like amazing glow in her eye. And she just said, it was such a humbling moment, because she just said, "I'm just so happy to be alive. I'm so lucky." And as I talked to her, she didn't have any kind of anger, or she said, "I feel so sorry for the person that felt that they had to do this to me." And that to me was so telling. And I just knew at that moment, this is a person with a powerful message and story, and I just wanted to know her. So it was amazing, because here she was, this is her and her boyfriend, that summer, before she was in the suicide bombing, and she had her whole life in front of her, and she was this beautiful young girl. And at all times, so these pictures were all around her bed, and there wasn't one moment when she was in the hospital that she was alone. And I just knew that I needed to know this person, because she was magical. So I got a grant, and that following summer I went to Israel, and I lived with her. And I said I wanted to really document her recovery. So this was an unbelievable moment where that's her boyfriend Tal, she was in the picture with, and this is at 4 o'clock in the morning, because she was burned from all over her body, and she couldn't see daylight. So all of her friends would acclimate to her time. So our days really began at sundown. We would sleep all day, and we would be up all night to be with her. And it was amazing. And I just want to share her testimony, because it's very moving. She says, "At the age of 23, I celebrated my birthday in Sinai with my boyfriend Tal. I was a student of reflexology and a bartender on Allenby Street. I lived in an apartment with Tal and 2 dogs in Tel Aviv. Now at the age of 25, I'm a victim of terror, fighting for my independence, with many years of rehabilitation to come. I am burned on 70% of my body. I just celebrated my birthday in the park with a very select group of people. Because of this group's belief and love for me, I realize there is a reason to live, and to live at any price. I'm the prettiest girl in my class." That's a line from a famous Israeli song. "I'm a girl who likes to laugh and have fun, but this girl is actually not a girl anymore. I'm a woman who is newly aware of her own power. This power exists in all of us if you are put to the test. I am as happy as I have ever been in my life, and I won the knowledge to discover exactly what I am worth. To understand that although there is so much suffering in the world, there is also much happiness and joy. I feel blessed to experience both deeply. Like my best friend in her wheelchair says, there's an angel in every one of us, and we, the crippled, are the ones who learn this. My goal is to show the world that the force of life is stronger than everything, and love, the will to live, is all that really matters. No religions, no borders, no nothing, just this." So I come back to this picture because this was the portrait that I made of her at another late night at 3 in the morning. And I just remember shaking, because I felt so honored that she trusted me to take this really intimate and revealing picture of herself. And during that time, she introduced me to her friends. This is Maytal. This is who she was referring to as her best friend in the wheelchair. Maytal was standing next to her brother, who was killed. She lost her leg in a car bombing during the Israeli Halloween. and this is Eyal. He was in the room next to Kinneret, and at this moment, he is learning that he was not kidnapped. He was on a bus bombing, and he lost his eyesight and his ears. So for the first 2 weeks in the hospital, he was screaming because he thought he was kidnapped. But it's at this moment, which is his birthday, that that he's learning that he's with his family in the hospital. And it was so scary for me. I actually wasn't planning on taking his picture, but his parents, took the blanket off him and were like, please photograph, show the world what happened to our son. And this is Michal. She also lost her legs walking home from school from a car bomb. This is Haitam. He had a really interesting and complicated story because he's an Arab Israeli and he was with his Jewish girlfriend. They were a couple that none of their family knew that they were a couple until they ended up in the hospital together. And they were in the first female suicide bombing. And actually, when the book came out, it was one of the most incredible nights. We flew in Haitam and Kinneret, and we had a panel discussion. And we had a translator. He felt more comfortable speaking in Arabic, and we found a translator, and it happened to be that this translator from the UN was Palestinian, and she was just there to translate, not to have any opinions. And he said that night he actually felt more taken care of by Israelis, and he felt a little disappointed by the Muslim community. And that was just his opinion. And the woman who was translating said, I will not say that. I will not say that. And it was just fascinating because I'm like, this is the conflict playing out right here. And it was really a special and fascinating night. But I also knew that it was very, very, very important to tell the full picture. And so I went to the New York Times Magazine and I asked them if I could work with a reporter and photograph Palestinians that were civilians, not at all a part of the conflict, who were also injured. So it took a long time. It's very hard to find, we found these children who were injured, but they, apparently they'd been throwing rocks at a tank, so that was considered that they were instigating something. So we researched it, and the people that we found, this is an incredible woman who was driving home from a wedding one night, and settlers opened fire at her car. She has 7 bullet wounds, and she almost lost her daughter. I think I have his, this is Nicola, and his mom says, the occupation took Nicola's arm. Ooh, I'm sorry. The occupation took Nicola's arm. My family has never been involved directly in the conflict. We did nothing to bring on this pain and anxiety. Our children have lost their childhood. Even their toys and their games are connected to the occupation. The games of Israeli soldiers opening fire, playing hide and seek in house raids, climbing tanks are among the most popular. Is this life? Is this childhood? So the kind of amazing thing, though, while I was doing this is that everyone that I had met, everyone, and I'm not sugarcoating this, really felt like they wanted to know the other side. The book that I carried around, he just I just remember him searching through and wanting to see the Israeli side, and then I would go back to Tel Aviv, and Kinneret would want to hear what he wrote, and it was just, I felt like this messenger in a way, and it felt like everyone really had the same hope and desires and dreams and wishes, and it just felt like they were all victims of this government and the situation, and I felt lucky to have been this messenger and hopefully open their eyes to certain things that they were apparent enemies, and it felt kind of good to know that they had more in common than not. And while this was his. He was actually playing with a toy gun, and a soldier shot his foot while he was playing with a toy gun. So just, your students, I'm just also weaving in, while I'm doing my personal work, I'm also getting many different commissions from magazines that I work with. So while I was in Israel, this is the Prime Minister. I photographed him a couple of times. And he was the Person of the Year for Time magazine. And this is a story I did on settlers, hilltop settlers. They're building these homes illegally in the West Bank. And also during this time, I'm taking a lot of different commissions, and this is Dolly Parton. This was one of my favorites. I was just about to get married, and I asked her what the secret was for a long-lasting marriage, and she said, travel a lot and not together. Justin Bieber, the Octomom. And I did this campaign. It was for education for Native Americans, to encourage them to stay on the reservation and go to college on the reservation. And this takes me to Southern Rites, which actually began before Israel. I was commissioned by Spin Magazine, and I got the call right after I bought my first ticket to Israel. And I got a call from Spin. An editor said he received a letter from a student there who was outraged because she couldn't take her boyfriend to the prom because he was black and she was white. So he said, we have to go down and do this story. And I said, I'm there. So we went down to Georgia. This is in Montgomery County, Georgia. And the prom had since passed, but the next segregated event was homecoming. So the young girl, Anna, who wrote the letter, she had since graduated, but this is her sister, Julie, who is a freshman, and they kind of chaperoned us and took us around the town. And this is Julie with her boyfriend, Bubba. This is Anna, right here, who I call the town activist, who is the reason why we got there. And this is amazing because this isn't the letter that she wrote, but this is to the magazine, but this is a journal, no, not a journal entry, a letter that an essay that she wrote for history class. She got a 76. In outrage why that the proms aren't together, and threatening that if you don't do something, I'm going to continue writing letters, which she did. And this is, I just love the comment that her teacher wrote. It's hard to read the writing, but her teacher's basically explaining why they still have segregated proms. And it says, it will eventually be a reality. But defending them, kind of. And this is this letter, this note that she got passed in class. What's going on about the prom? I heard something about you, Betsy, and Kim wanting to have joined prom, and you all going to have a meeting and all about it. Well, all I have to say is nobody in the 10th grade besides you wants a prom like that. And I can tell you nobody is going to come if it's that way. So what's going on? Just wondering. So I went there, and I landed in this town that felt very much, on the surface, like the suburban town that I grew up in that had homecoming and football games, and that was the biggest thing in town. Except one thing, which was that they have a white and a black queen for every grade, and the homecoming ballot that every student would vote on, there was a column for a white girl and a column for a black girl. So that was shocking, but what seemed so shocking to me seemed so regular and commonplace and celebrated to them. So it was shocking, but at the same time, it felt like this really incredibly warm and loving, and also these kids were all friends. It just didn't, there was such a dissonance, it just didn't make sense to me. And this was homecoming night. I was only there for 2 days, but it left such an impression on me that I had to keep going back for 10 years. So this is, they're waiting to hear the announcements. And this is amazing. This is not a great picture, but it's more of an illustrative picture to show you that they were, the young kids were there to be the crown bearers. And they have a white couple and a black couple, but yet this girl is not white, she's Mexican, but they didn't know what to do with the Mexicans, so the Mexicans were put under the white category. So it was just amazing. And this was the lineup when they announced the homecoming. And there's a white girl and a black girl for every, for freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior class. And then I just find their the yearbook amazing because they're proud of their tradition, and I was amazed by it. So I went to Israel, and you saw that work. And when I was in Israel, the whole time I was haunted by this town, and I said, when I finish with this project, I'm going back to Montgomery County. I have to know that town more. So in 2008, I called the school. Anna and Julie had since moved away, so I didn't know anyone there. I had no connection there. And they both moved to Atlanta with their boyfriends and went to college and moved on. And so I didn't know who to call, so I just called the school and I asked when the prom was. And the woman said, which one? And I said, both, either, all. She said, well, the white folks prom, hold on a second, she had to ask. And she comes back, totally matter of fact. The white folks prom is this weekend, and the black folks prom is in a couple weeks in May. So I hung up the phone, and I called the New York Times right away, and I said, okay, we have our first black president, and we are still having segregated proms. This is insane. I have to go do this story. So I went down, and the first person, there wasn't much time to do research, which I usually do my own research, and without even taking out my camera, I just talk to people and figure out the story before I even photograph. So the first person I met was Kiki, who I recognize her, this is from 2002, but I saw her as a senior, and she was in the parking lot all excited because she was going to be the first black girl to go to the white folks prom, she said. And this is her boyfriend, her best friend Dylan, and this is them at homecoming. Homecomings had since been integrated. So we have integrated homecomings, but still segregated proms. So she says, I'm so excited, Dylan's girlfriend broke up with him, and I'm gonna be the first black girl to go to the white folks prom. I said, I have to photograph you, please let me photograph you. So she said, great. I said, talk to your parents first, because I had to always ask parents' permission, because these are minors. So I got a phone call later that night in my motel room, and I was fast asleep, and the person at the other end was hysterical crying, like hyperventilating. And finally I figured out it was Kiki, and she said that she's not going to the prom, and I'm not going to be able to photograph her. And when she calmed down, she explained to me that Dylan called her and said that his parents don't feel comfortable with him taking her to the prom. So she said, but I'm going to my prom in a few weeks, will you come back and photograph me? And I said, absolutely. So I then met Harley, and she was the chair of the white folks prom. And she said that I could follow her getting ready, but she didn't want to talk about race. This didn't have anything to do about race. So I made this photograph of her in the salon, and then a parent from, I guess, recognized me from 2002, and the next thing I know, I'm being chased out of town, literally. My tires were slashed. The cops came to my table at Ruby Tuesdays and told me to go back to where I came from. People are all part of the NRA, and they'll take the law into their own hands. So it was pretty awful, and I was scared. And I felt defeated, and here I was taking this, pitching the story to the New York Times. They send me there, and I'm chased out of town. It was mortifying. So they said, look, unfortunately, this is probably going to be relevant next year, so let's revisit this next year. So I went on my own, and I promised Kiki that I would photograph her. So I went back, and this is Kiki before her prom. And that's her with her best friend. And again, just to tell you, I'm interviewing everyone. And I started actually experimenting with audio. So I'm recording voices now. I'm not writing, they're not writing, I'm recording their voices. And this is Kiki, because she was the chosen girl in her first grade class to be the person to hand the crown to the homecoming queen. And she felt special. This is Sierra and Kent. There's always one or two mixed couples at the black prom, but Sierra went to the white prom a few weeks before, but didn't take Kent because he wasn't allowed. And this is Lacey, the prom queen. So during that trip, I was driving down the street, and the main road, and this took me by surprise, just grabbed my attention, and I pulled over, and this is Shelby on her grandmother's car. They sell Confederate flag paraphernalia. So the next year, it was again the white prom and black prom, and I went down and I spent time with the families before I was photographing, and I said, you know what, this is about race, and I want to hear why this is still going on. And I was very, I was very transparent in what I wanted to know and tell and understand. So Harley's family and her friends allowed me to photograph them and sat for interviews. And again, I was told that I was gonna be allowed into the white prom, but once again, I was escorted away from the property. But this is Harley before the white prom. And this is right before I was told that I'd be arrested if I did not leave. But then I went across the street where it was no longer private property. And I told anyone who wanted to be part of this story, because this particular class was very close and they were very tired of this tradition and they wanted a change. So I felt like this was the right year to do this, and I had enough people, white people, who weren't afraid to speak and to tell me why this was a problem. So Sierra is one of those brave girls who shared her story with me and was pissed that she couldn't go to the prom with her best friend, Kira. And then the following night, Saturday night, in the same exact location, the Vidalia Community Center, was the black prom. And here's Kiki, she's getting her hair done to go cheer on her cousin, Kira. And Kira was the part of the graduating class that year. And this is Angel before the black prom. And this is the parking lot. And this is on the dance floor. And Skyla, who's in the middle, also had the same situation where the night before, she went to the prom alone, but she couldn't take her boyfriend Barry because he wasn't allowed in. And this is prom king and queen, Naisha and Kyrie. Felicia, love her. And this is just to show you what we're talking about. 54 students. This is their graduating class, which is unbelievable. So I was there for graduation, which was just a couple weeks later. And the New York Times, the one thing that I promised the students, they were truly scared that if they were part of this piece, that they wouldn't be allowed to graduate. So I promised them, and the New York Times was great, and they honored that, and the piece went live. I did a multimedia piece. It was in the Sunday magazine, but it didn't go live until midnight and after their graduation. So this is how it got printed in the magazine. And the story really caused, thankfully, some national outrage, and they finally decided to come together and have an integrated prom. And I knew that I needed to return. I knew that I probably wouldn't be welcome, so I made several trips that winter, and I went in front of parents, in front of the superintendent, asking them if I could please continue to spend time and document the first integrated prom because it was historic. And they were pretty angry that I brought this light onto their town and the spotlight, and it took a while for them to agree to let me photograph it. At the same time, I also knew that the proms were definitely a symptom of something larger, a story about race that I wanted to tell, and I felt also a bit frustrated because I felt as if the pictures, you know, young, good-looking teenagers dressed up, it just didn't tell the nuanced story that I felt like I was really experiencing. So I took a kind of like a crash course in filmmaking, and I just kind of figured out how to film. And my biggest goal is to, you know, intimacy is always my my biggest goal, and I wanted to be able to film the way I photograph. So it took a lot of trial and error and time. But anyway, I went back in 2010. Finally, they voted to allow me to photograph and film the integrated prom. And this was the only photograph that I took before I was then escorted off by the cops again. But then I waited till the end of prom, and I would grab students coming out of the back when parents were gone already and they didn't care. So I started to interview people coming out. So this is also when I started to, I felt like the environment and the community was a character as well. So I started to kind of, this is actually where, you know, Vidalia onions are famous, and this is the community that grew Vidalia onions. It was just I grew up eating Vidalia onions, and then at the same time as the Vidalia Onion Festival, or they're having segregated proms, it felt so surreal to me. And this is, you know, church is a huge part of the community. And so, I was driving down one of the main streets, and I thought that there was a protest. So I pulled over and I asked these guys what they were protesting, what's going on, and they said they're not protesting. In fact, they were outside of the jail. Instead of doing jail time, they I call this is titled public shaming. He actually was arrested for disorderly conduct. A nightclub had closed and he wanted to use the bathroom. And they wouldn't let him in to use the bathroom, so he urinated outside and got arrested. And because of that, he had to walk up and down the main street and be publicly humiliated instead of doing jail time. And then this guy was photographing them saying, "This is a great idea. I want to bring this back to where I live." He was visiting his family, and it was just such a surreal moment. The story kind of comes full circle, and these are the images that I made at the first prom. This is actually Naisha, who is I follow up with everyone that I photograph, and I kind of see where they've gone in their life, and this is Naisha, who is a very close friend of Justin's, and in her interview, I just love this. She says, you know, she was hopeful, but yet she said, "Look, in this town, we take one step forward and 2 steps back." So I'll just quickly go through these. This was the first biracial couple to go to the integrated prom together. And I just love this picture because it's such a fun picture filled with life and just like teenagers doing what teenagers do, and it's a celebration. This is what prom should be and what they were preventing for so long. So I just love this one. And this is the cover of the book, and this felt really symbolic for me because this is something that would never have been able to happen years before. And this is the last picture in the book because she's amazing, and Anna, it's all because of her. You know, she changed, even though it's a small little town, because she used her voice as a student, she was able to create change, and I just salute her because she was brave, and now she lives in Atlanta with her beautiful family, and yeah, that's the story of how I made Southern Rites. So again, this whole presentation has been how my personal work and the commission work is intertwined. So I just wanted to show you a campaign that I just recently was commissioned and I was really proud of. And it's celebrating, the whole mission of it was to celebrate diversity in America, and it was an activation for, before the election, there were installations all over college campuses to get students to come out and vote. So it was called As American As, and these are some of the billboards. Shockingly, this is in New York. It got taken down because apparently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pictures were offensive.
Thank you so much for sharing everything. I mean, before I get to my question, first off, I'd like to say just how much I admire your tenacity in pursuing a lot of these stories with so many obstacles that would have, you know, sent, I think, a lot of people packing, and it's just really inspiring to see.
Thank you.
But since there's so much to process with all of that, I actually had a kind of a simple technical kind of question. I'm curious to know on some of your assignments you go on for the New York Times and for different publications. What like how do you travel usually? Like in terms of crew and gear, and especially now that you're doing so much filming. Like how many. Like, what's that look like for you?
So, sure. I don't like to be weighted down by equipment. But that being said, I still use lights, and I try to use the most minimal equipment. I don't shoot film anymore, so that changes. Digital has kind of changed because I can use a lot of available light. And I travel with an assistant. I always travel with an assistant, and that's it. If we're doing, if I'm filming, I'll find somebody who's a local sound person, and then I will shoot, and or I'll have a second camera or a first camera, and I'll be second camera.
Hi, thanks so much for sharing your work with us. You spoke a little bit about fear in both the testimony and the Southern Rites work, and I'm curious, as a photographer, how you deal with that fear. Where do you draw on the bravery from your subjects or from yourself to complete the work, whether it's physical peril that you're facing or the moral dilemma of when to photograph?
Well, I have to say, anyone that knows me well knows that I'm a little bit of a paranoid, neurotic person. So really, I feel like working helps me it helps me conquer the fear and the desire to understand things and to tell stories trumps, for lack of a better word, I'm sorry. I gotta find a different word, but it's much stronger than the fear. So my fear, but I think fear is really powerful, and I feel like it drives me a lot.
In hindsight, which is always, a different perspective than when you're actually doing things, the issue of access for Southern Rites, is there any way you could have handled it differently to avoid those dangerous situations or avoid getting kicked out of the prom as it's about to start?
No, I felt like I handled it. But one thing is that I used to give into them, and if I felt like they were really intimidating me, I would go away. But then I realized I got stronger as I went along, and I realized my rights. And that's when I realized that I'm not going to let them scare me away. And it made me even more determined to tell the story because I knew that they were trying to hide something and cover something up. So I felt like I had more of somewhat of a responsibility to tell that story.
I was thinking in particular about the sheriff's, threat to arrest you. I mean, you're a journalist. You're working for a reputable paper. Does he have any real grounds to go on?
No, and that's why I wasn't arrested, because there was no grounds to arrest me. I was shooting a public parade. But he's the master of that fiefdom there, so.
Thank you so much.